Hey, RetconRaider here. Today I thought we'd take a quick look at a game that I almost ended up skipping over. Today I thought we'd talk about Heat Signature by Suspicious Developments. So, what is Heat Signature? Well, it's a fast-paced, highly lethal top-down action game with elements of a real-time with pause strategy game. In Heat Signature, the player takes on the role of an infiltrator, a mercenary trained in the art of breaking into moving starships. Armed with a breacher pod and 2 random pieces of equipment, the player has to take on procedurally generated contracts, all of which involve breaking into various spaceships for various nefarious purposes. The bulk of the action is handled in real time, often giving the player just seconds to react to each new disaster. But the player can pause the game at any time, allowing them to consider their current situation, mull over their options, and set up their next move. It ends up turning what appears to be a generic action game into something closer to a puzzle strategy game. When the player first starts out, the missions are generally very basic, stealing cargo or rescuing captives from small, lightly guarded ships. These are the sort of jobs that can be easily handled with just a handgun and a heavy wrench, as the player breaches a ship's security and disables or avoids the guards one by one. But over time, the player will be encouraged to take on more ambitious jobs, infiltrating larger ships equipped with weapon systems that can blow the player's breacher pod to pieces, and automated sentry guns that will shoot intruders on sight. Crewmen will become more numerous, and many will start making use of better equipment such as shotguns, grenades, emergency shields, and even personal teleporters. Fortunately, as the player completes missions, they'll get the opportunity to loot or purchase better equipment, allowing them to more efficiently overcome these new challenges. Aside from conventional weaponry, there are numerous pieces of specialty equipment to make use of, ranging from keycard cloners to teleporters, each with their own unique uses and limitations. The player can disable a sentry gun through a wall using the crash beam, but they can also hijack that sentry gun and turn it on the crew by using a subverter instead. The player can slip past heavily armed patrols using a stealth shield, or use their personal emergency shield to deliberately bait the armed patrol into shooting at them, and then watch gleefully as the bullets bounce back at their enemies. A player facing overwhelming odds can trigger a slipstream device, letting them temporarily move 10 times their normal speed, emptying an entire clip into a group of enemies in the blink of an eye. And when all else fails, the player can just start blowing holes in walls with grenades, venting the enemy crew into space. There are even different types of breacher pods, each with their own unique advantages that lend themselves towards certain strategies or playstyles. The number of possible strategies, combined with the unforgiving nature of the game, can definitely become overwhelming. But fortunately, the player can practice using unconventional equipment loadouts by unlocking defector challenges. Simple strategies may work during the early game, but the player will have to get used to juggling multiple devices as they take on increasingly complex jobs. They'll also have to get used to changing their loadout to accommodate different mission objectives, and employees will often offer bonuses if the player can accomplish those objectives in specific ways. Some employees may prefer the player to leave no witnesses, requiring them to slaughter the entire enemy crew, while others may instead prefer that the player complete their objectives with no casualties, or they may prefer the player to complete the job without ever being spotted at all. And then, of course, there's the player's personal mission. Each character has a randomized personal objective that they're working towards accomplishing, rescuing a loved one, getting revenge on an enemy, or perhaps just stealing something valuable enough to let them retire early. These missions will take time and effort to unlock, and will present the player with daunting challenges to overcome. If the player ends up on the wrong side of a bullet, then the enemy crew will cheerfully toss them out of the nearest airlock, leaving them with a few precious seconds to save themselves with their remote-controlled breacher pod. If they don't make it in time, then they die. Game over. If the player is spotted but manages to escape, then the crew will raise an alarm, and the ship's captain will set a course for the nearest friendly space station. If the ship reaches that station, then the player's mission automatically fails. And if the player is still on board the ship at the time, then they'll be automatically captured. Game over. And even if the player does end up beating the odds and succeeds in completing their character's personal mission, then they automatically retire. Game over. But it's not game over, not really. Each time the player gets captured or dies or retires, they'll be presented with a selection of 4 more characters to choose from. Each of these new characters starts with their own randomized equipment loadout, as well as their own personal mission to work towards. There is an overarching story goal to work towards, in the form of a simple power struggle between factions. As the player completes missions, they'll be able to help other space stations declare their independence. As more space stations become independent, the player will gain access to better equipment in the shops, or to various small starting bonuses for their future characters. If the player ever manages to free all the space stations, then that's it. They've won the game. But really, the story, or what little there is of it, is just a side note. The real focus of the game is jumping from one character to the next as you take on missions, infiltrate ships, liberate space stations, and then die in the cold vastness of space. So, now that we know a little more about the game, what's the verdict? Would I recommend Heat Signature? Well, I won't leave you in suspense. This is a game that I would definitely recommend, at least if you enjoy small-scale strategy games. Now, I'll admit, I don't normally go for action games, and I almost ended up avoiding this title just because it looked like another generic action game. But I did end up picking it up, in part because the developer previously worked on Gunpoint, another game that I've enjoyed in the past. And honestly, I'm very glad I decided to give Heat Signature a chance. It's definitely an action game on the surface, but the variety of creative equipment combined with the ability to pause and plan out your actions adds a significant strategic depth to what might have otherwise been a pretty shallow Twitch-based experience. It's the kind of game that's as fast or slow-paced as you want it to be, and it's the kind of game that can be played in short 15-minute doses, or that can be played all night long. Personally, I've often found myself using it as a quick palate cleanser between playing other games. Although the player is actively encouraged to constantly switch from one character to the next, there's still a sense of long-term accomplishment as you free space stations and unlock new bonuses. And as an added bonus, successfully retiring an old character will also unlock additional small bonuses, such as recovering a previous character who was captured, or creating a legacy item that your future characters may find during missions. The game is a single-player experience, but it does have a few features tied into Steam's friend list. If the player's character is captured, for example, it's possible for other people on that player's friend list to take on missions that would allow them to rescue that character, and if they're successful, then they'll get to control your lost character. Likewise, legacy items left behind by retired characters won't just appear in your personal game, they'll appear in the games of everyone who happens to be on your friend list. So elements of both your successes and your failures can be enjoyed by your friends. Overall, I would give the game an arbitrary score of 1.5 thumbs up, or about an 8 out of 10 for those of you who prefer a numerical scale. It's a fun, fast-paced game with a surprising strategic twist and some very clever design elements. Honestly, if I had to complain about anything, it would be that I wish there was more to the campaign structure, with more story to discover and maybe some sort of character advancement system. But really, that's just me wishing that the game was more of an RPG or a full-fledged tactical strategy game. And obviously that's not what the developer was trying to make, and that's just fine. For what it is, Heat Signature is a very enjoyable game, provided you know what you're getting into before you purchase it. It can definitely get frustrating at times when one bad move costs you a perfectly good character, but that's just part of the game, and there's no shortage of new characters where that one came from. You can buy Heat Signature on Steam for about $15 though it is important to note that the game is currently only available for the Windows operating system. The developer is currently undecided on whether the game will be ported to other operating systems. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I'll go take on another mission or two. Maybe 3. 5 at the most. This is RetconRaider, signing off. Thanks for listening. Oh, and remember, although I do love talking about Heat Signature, you can find out more about the game by visiting the official website, or the store page on Steam. Links are in the description.